Good afternoon, everyone. Now, YouTube and Google are going to demonetize climate denial content. Well, they're going to say versus if you're just reporting on it, which shocked me that a human reviewer flagged my Antarctic and Arctic sea ice report as raw footage for law enforcement graphic violence. Antarctic sea ice anomalies, Greenland ice anomalies. And now, South Pole posting most severe cold season on record, 4.5 degrees lower than the 30-year average. I was just reporting on that. It's within the terms of service. Also, ads will run with new research around the issue of climate change. Arctic sea ice extent 4.9 million square kilometers at the very lowest of the melt season. IPCC Climate Change 2021 summary for policymakers. Their Arctic sea ice models dwindled to oblivion, but the star is marking where we are with sea ice this year. Glaring anomaly there. Also discussions in human-influenced, unprecedented temperature rises, clearly stating the warmest multi-century period in more than 100,000 years. Yet we only go back 12,000 years. The onset of the Younger Dryas, 3 years. Termination, meaning the ending, around 60 years. That's even under a century. How much did it warm at the termination period of the Younger Dryas? About 15 degrees Celsius in 60 years. Another glaring error that I'm just discussing new research around the issue within the terms of service. James Hansen, skepticism thus plays an essential role in scientific research. That was 1999. Now there's a carbon market and we're moving to a completely renewable economy, so change the tune. A bicyclist in Florida got a strange email from Google that said law enforcement was requesting his user data. This bicyclist found out he was a suspect in a burglary. His Google location pinged him near the scene of a crime a year earlier. He was innocent. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. His phone betrayed him. Google says it received 11,554 similar warrants from law enforcement, each one requesting a user's geolocation. This is why a VPN like Virtual Shield is so important. It hides your location from tech giants. You can head over to virtualshield.com and in the download tab, I'm going to choose Firefox. And click Install Now to add the Virtual Shield add-on. It's just that easy. And get started with your free 30-day trial. Install it, click Connect. You'll see the shield turn from red to green. And you'll see how from my initial service provider, I was able to even change my IP. Virtual Shield Network protected. This is why I highly recommend Virtual Shield VPN. Get 50% off for life with a free 30-day trial. Download it today. Go to virtualshield.com/adapt2030 or click on the link in the description box below. And now on with the video. And you knew this was going to be coming eventually after all the other boxes were ticked on things to demonetize. Politics, society, and news. And the tech giant says when evaluating content, they're going to look carefully at which the context of the claims are made, differentiating between a false claim and a report that discusses the claim. So I put out this video talking about Arctic sea ice and Greenland ice with Arctic ice rebounding unexplainably, and it was flagged by a human reviewer. Now normally when you get flagged in a demonetization on a video, you have the option to click for human review, but somebody jumped in front, a human jumped in front, flagged the video for raw footage focused on violent law enforcement, although I'm talking about sea ice, flagged it and would not even allow me the option for a human review. Now, although YouTube's policy is starting November 1st, it seems that a human reviewer took it upon themselves to jump in front of the line and test my channel with this human review demonetization. If you don't have time to watch that previous video, surface mass balance increasing on Greenland, mainly due to a cool June and July during the heat wave. Okay, diametric opposite statement there. But anyway, the anomalies in May and June spiking off the chart to 13.7 gigatons for the day. Would have to increase the size of the chart there. And also the anomalies adding more ice well above the normal. Hard to explain that. Also talking about Antarctic sea ice. From the left on the chart, July, August, September. In the depths of winter coming into the melt season above average. But then you notice the green line from last year was well above average all the way through the melt season. So there's some anomalies down there as well. We're seeing record temperatures. And speaking of temperatures, hey, I'm just reporting on this, YouTube. Just reporting. Just discussing the claim that there's some problems with the climate. University of Alabama, Huntsville, lower tropospheric temperatures, only 1/4 of a degree above baseline. And see, this has been an ongoing issue anyway since 2007 and 8. There's different data sets showing different global temperatures. Now here's an example of lower tropospheric temperatures. NASA NOAA in the red, warmer than University of Alabama, Huntsville. Which one do we believe? Policymakers. They're both using satellites to arrive at very similar conclusions, but one's cooler than the other. Which one do you think the news will run with? And then we have this whole land and ocean temperature data sets. This is off NASA and GISS again, running at almost 1 degree Celsius. But this has been an ongoing problem with overlapping data sets on the land-only temperatures. Forget the ocean this time. And then you can see the variance in the temperatures, although they're measuring the exact same thing. 6 different temperature sets, 6 different readings. You know, for policymakers, we should be discussing these differences because it makes a huge difference on what policymakers are doing. So if you want to dig into it further, I've linked everything in the description box below. You can go to Goddard Institute, Hadley Center, that's Had Crew for the short on that. University of Alabama, Huntsville, and then we got RSS, that's Remote Sensing Systems. And the newspapers love to go with Climate Reanalyzer because it's the warmest of all of them. So Washington Post, New York Times, always are using Climate Reanalyzer. Why don't they do the same and then use University of Alabama, Huntsville and compare the temperatures? Because when you mash it all together, this is what it looks like. Which one are you going to choose and which one is really showing the truth? This is another thing that should be reported. And you know what, YouTube? I'm just discussing the claim. Just discussing it. And right off the NASA website here, Goddard Institute, they're showing you how they cooled the past. When all the adjustments for non-climatic effects are incorporated into the land-ocean temperatures, thanks, Gavin Schmidt, should we not also ask, hey, what about the raw temperature data? Doesn't that count for anything anymore? It has to be readjusted? Because look at that 1940 spike. If that wasn't adjusted downward, a lot of what you're hearing about right now couldn't have occurred, and none of that warming really would have taken place until the year 2000. But they had to run it all the way through the 1990s. So by cooling the past, you get an extra decade or 15 years of saying, hey, the temperatures are running northward. YouTube, Google, I'm just reporting the claim. And this is actually from NASA, telling you that in earnest, they cooled the temperatures themselves. And I'm just discussing it, just reporting on it. It's data. Not even an opinion. And then also moving on to other parts of this new policy, ads and monetization will still be allowed to run alongside other climate-related topics, like grand solar minimum. Oh, I don't see that in there. Can't talk about cooling. Okay, let's not do that. Let's talk about new research around the issue. Let's do that. Let's go to the IPCC Climate Change 2021 Summary for Policymakers. And I'm just going to talk about new research because this new research coming out in the 2021 Policymaker Summary has some real interesting data in there saying that the warming is at an unprecedented rate, at least in the last 2,000 years, influenced by humans, but startlingly, the warmest multi-century period in more than 100,000 years. And using peer-reviewed research, an article from Nature, Gradual Onset and Recovery of the Younger Dryas. The onset of the Younger Dryas occurred rapidly in about 3 years. And then the termination, when this event ended, occurred just over 60 years, less than a century. So the IPCC policymakers, a multi-century. So we're way under that. We're at under a century, around 60 years. So you ask, what was the Younger Dryas? Well, the termination period is that red line, where it says YD in the gray, going straight up in 60 years, 15 degrees Celsius. Peer-reviewed research. So I honestly don't know with integrity how the IPCC, with its Climate Change 2021 summary for policymakers, is able to even claim this when there's contrary research, and I'm talking about new research around the issue. So looking at this data and looking at the ice cores that quantify how much aerosol was in the atmosphere, that dark black line in the ice was the Younger Dryas period. 100,000 years, that's a big claim when there's information to say otherwise within the last 12,000. And also with the Greenland Ice Core Survey Project, which is the gold standard for global temperatures. Since I showed you the ice cores, these are the temperature reconstructions done from that research. And I can see equally a very steep, quick spike around 8,300 years prior, and also 7,000 years prior. So a lot of these claims coming from the policymaker paper, they didn't go further back in history to take a look at climate data sets showing opposite information. It needs to be compared. Absolutely it does. There should be debates on this climate policy, absolutely. And it should stay monetized because this is just comparing information. And staying with the same summary for policymakers, new information, South Pole Post, most severe cold season on record. It was the second coldest. Now a couple more cooler days had surpassed that second coldest. And it puts it at 4.5 degrees Celsius lower than the 30-year average. So I'm going to ask questions to the policymakers and back to the IPCC. You told us it was going to get incredibly warm, and the opposite direction is where we're going with a lot of things, especially with this sea ice. This comes directly from the 2021 Climate Change Policy Paper. The September Arctic sea ice area extent. Every model that is being run shows drastic declines. Yet the star, which I put on the chart with the 2021 Arctic sea ice low for the season at 4.92 million square kilometers, not even one model got this correct. We should be discussing these public debates on climate policy because if none of their models picked up that the ice was going to increase, then we have a huge problem if they're giving this to the policymakers and information is incorrect through the IPCC summary. Should we not discuss this? Let's take a look at the Arctic sea ice extent. That light blue line, 2021, is where we sit. I know there's a lot of other lines, but it's definitely not anywhere near the bottom. Let's take out the noise. You can see the low there. IPCC models say it's going well below 4 million square kilometers. And off the NSIDC, that's the Snow Ice Data Center itself, Arctic sea ice extent for September, below 4.92 million square kilometers, the 12th lowest in the satellite record. Now again, we should be talking about this. 12th lowest is nowhere near the lowest, which was the projections for all the models. So the annual extent being the 12th lowest, I was discussing the same things. They got my video discussing Antarctic sea ice and Arctic sea ice, demonetized human review, well within even the new policies that YouTube is going to unfurl on November 1st. Debate around the climate policy and just pointing out news. Simple reports available from government agencies, statistical data on ice. Why was that demonetized? That should be the question. And taking you back into a time warp here, James Hansen, 1999. I do like his statements, Dr. Hansen. You have changed your persona since then. But in 1999, skepticism thus plays an essential role in scientific research. And far from trying to silence skeptics, science invites their contributions. But now something's flipped the switch. And I think, doing research into the carbon trading carbon credits, carbon trading, carbon offset credits, personal carbon allowances, and the amount of trillions of dollars that are emerging out of this single business alone. Forget the windmills, forget the conversion to solar power and everything green. This itself is going to be a new monetary asset base. As long as CO2 continues to be the driver for all things climate. If something alternative comes out and says, wait, maybe the sun is responsible for some of this, those statements from James Hansen about new scientific research and the right to express personal opinions, carrying out rigorous objectivity and scientific research, those all go into the dustbin of history, right along with those statements from 1999. But as global crop yields slink into record lows across the planet, you're going to have to think about storable foods. With rising food prices and inflation, hyperinflation inbound, there's other causes that we see in cycles through history, the rise and fall of civilizations. You might want to think about some storable foods. DAP 2030 and My Patriot Supply, the 3-month emergency food supply. That link's in the description box below, along with every single graph, PDF, story, and story link for all of tonight's video, right in that same description box. It's a great way to keep you and your family safe so you can ride out some of the chaos. I do appreciate you watching. Hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you next time.